So this is where I'm camped out tonight, way up in the mountains of Utah. There's snow here. Hey folks, Chris here. Last I left you, I was in Kanab, Utah. After some kind of intense travel through Arizona, I have traveled over to Cedar City, Utah. And I'm migrating on my way up to more of central and northern Utah before I begin to trek up to the Pacific Northwest. And I wanted to come to Cedar City because there was a particular route that I wanted to take that I haven't taken before. Dixie National Forest is known for being quite beautiful, and Route 14 would take me right through the middle of it, and so I decided to take a risk and explore it. But first, so in my last video I talked about the fact that I killed my battery in the engine by having left the lights on. Fortunately, I called my insurance and I have roadside assistance with it, and they came and they jump-started it. When it started up, I asked the fellow what kind of time I needed to drive the RV around in order to charge the batteries, because if I just turned off the RV at that point, the battery would still essentially be in a dead state. And he says, just go drive it around for an hour or so. So while I was out driving, I decided to just go up into the canyons around Kanab and do some exploring for about an hour. And that was great because the area around Kanab is stunning. It's sort of typical southern Utah, you know, all those red rocks, but it's also surprisingly green. And maybe it's because it's springtime. There's just incredible contrast between all of that intense red and the intense green that it is right now. While I was driving and exploring, all of a sudden I heard something underneath the RV, sort of like a mechanical sort of thud clank sound that didn't sound right. I thought, oh crud, what's going on? So I had stopped at this little museum that was on the side of the road that was built into the side of this big wall of rock, and it was a museum that I wanted to go and explore, but I didn't have time. But they had a big parking lot that I was able to pull off into, and I looked underneath the RV, and the exhaust pipe had a joint basically right in the middle of the RV, and it had become disconnected. And I had a feeling that that was the case because the engine suddenly sounded loud, which was an indication of something being wrong with the exhaust, the muffler not being engaged. So I was literally just a couple of miles from town. So I drove the RV carefully, not too fast. I drove it into town. It didn't look like it was just about to fall off, but it was clearly dissociated. So I took it back into town, and Kanab has a couple of mechanics that are just prominently right there on sort of the main little drag in there. And one of them is a Napa Auto Mechanics. And I went in and I asked them if they could fix it. And they said, sure. So, you know, I paid them $50 and they welded it back together. And so it should be a nice, strong weld now. And so whatever happened, you know, if you have an older RV, from the very beginning, my channel, I talked about the fact that I have an older RV, and that means you might run into mechanical issues and, you know, but I felt myself fortunate because if I hadn't accidentally drained my battery, I could have been driving off in the middle of, you know, boondocking somewhere and had that come off. And that would have been a much bigger pain to deal with. So my inadvertent battery goof actually kind of helped me with this other mechanical issue. So I ended up leaving. I was only in Kanab for a day and a half. I wasn't planning on staying there long, just long enough to actually do a little bit of project work that I needed to get done. And I need to talk about my mobile internet because it's actually fantastic. I've been really happy with it. So I can kind of go anywhere, but I like to kind of go to a coffee shop and work in a coffee shop. And Kanab's just big enough to have this one little coffee shop that's open half the day. And I got to know the people there because I've been there a couple of times. And I left town and drove up along the I-89 route. And I have to tell you, it's quite stunning. So the 89 route basically goes parallel to the main I-15 drag that goes up Utah. And it's more of a side way of getting up Utah. And it's incredibly picturesque. You just could be forgiven for thinking you're not in some little European country, as opposed to southern Utah, which is so well known for its desert intense desert types of landscapes of Bryce Canyon and Zions and all of the red rock and yeah, just amazing that you pass through these darling little towns that have interesting things that you're seeing. And I kept wanting to stop, and I left late in the day, and I kind of specifically left late in the day because I wanted to have really dramatic lighting. So I'd been up through that 89 corridor before, and I knew it was fairly amazing, but I had actually kind of forgotten how amazing it was. So I left later in the day, and it was a bit of a calculated risk because I was going to actually head up over this mountain range that kind of goes north to south along Utah. And it's just a little Route 14 that goes up into this elevated forest area, and there's a little town, not even a town, it's called Duck Creek Village. And it's something that on Google Maps I'd looked at and I wanted to go see. So I decided to go up there and boondocked up there for the night. And it was a little bit scary because it got down into the mid-teens. I mean, that's the elevation that it was at. And I thought, well, it's the beginning of May. Hopefully there's not going to be like any packed in snow, and the roads were clear. But it did scare me a little bit that there would be ice on the roads. During the day, it was getting up into upper 40s, mid 50s. So during the day, and it was really sunny, the roads would have been clear. But one of the things that surprised me was how much deer were up there. And I had to pay very close attention to the deer. In fact, a couple of times I made like direct eye contact with a couple of the deer that are like, okay, we're seeing you, and you know that I'm seeing you. It was kind of a funny thing. I had pre-scoped out a couple of possible places that I was going to park. Again, Google Maps, fantastic. And Google Maps had made their maps during the height of summer when everything was very dry. And it turns out that there was still quite a bit of very slushy, muddy areas. And I pulled off into this one area that could have worked. There was a stream down there, and I pulled off there and I kind of thought, well, I think I'm going to camp here for the night. But I actually ended up deciding, because it was a little bit muddy, to just continue on up further, where I knew via Google Maps that this one very large parking area. And I think I'm going to stay here tonight. I'm a little bit nervous because it is supposed to drop well below freezing, but I think for one night I'll be okay as long as I keep the heater going all night. But yeah, so this is where I'm going to park. And on Google Maps, I couldn't quite tell if it was going to be something I could park in, because sometimes you can't quite zoom in far enough to read signs. So I got there, I took a risk, and there was this big sign about parking, and it basically just said, look, no construction equipment can park here. If you're a trailer or you're just somebody that's going to park, you just can't park for more than 9 days here, right? Because I guess what happens is people will come up there and they will go camping out into the wilderness and they'll park their car there. And so basically what the sign was saying, look, you just can't park here for more than 9 consecutive days. So I was great. And not having ever been over this Route 14, I really didn't know exactly what to expect. You can look at things on Google Maps, but it's not entirely clear from there exactly what you're getting into. But there was a lake. On the map, there's this big lake right there that you can go camp at, and it was completely covered with ice and snow still. There was an immense amount of snow, nothing on the roads. I'm glad I did it, because that was actually an incredible route. It was one of those things that I didn't need to do. I could have just taken I-89 all the way up. I wanted to experience that. I mean, that's the whole reason why I've got this RV and I travel, is to kind of go up there and do this. Especially for me personally, where I've always played it safe, I'm pushing myself to take a few more of these risks out there. So I got into Cedar City, and I've been here for a couple of days, and it was actually kind of fun to come in here again, because Cedar City was the first town that I actually, when I left in my RV, was the first town that I actually came and sort of urban camped.